And now we take a commercial break, folks, from our usual content and discuss the age-old question, why do we have nothing to wear? Or why do we hate all of our clothes when we literally have a mountain full of clothes to cushion us from a bungee jumping fall for many, many miles? Why? Why do we do this, folks? Why? The interwebs have tried to answer this question in many different ways, but today I want to come to you from a psychological and philosophical perspective. Now, mind you, these are all my theories. None of this is scientific evidence. This is just coming from my own head, plus some other clever heads, much smarter than myself, from throughout history, who have given some thoughts and input into why we might be so dissatisfied with the things that we already own, or why we might seek novelty, which can happen in many areas of our lives, but this seems to be so prevalent in clothes, especially for, not to put on any stereotypes, but it's just a very common occurrence for many women to have too many clothes and yet nothing to wear. So let's dig deep. Now, like I said, there are two ways I want to look at this problem. First from a philosophical, then from a psychological point of view, both of which may intersect with some historical elements. This is a question I've asked myself too many times, but I started thinking of it in a new way when I was having a conversation with my mom, of all people, who is not into fashion at all, but she was going on one of her usual rants about this generation, what's happening in this generation, how we're all so consumed by following trends and buying new things, social media, etc., etc. But then it kind of occurred to me, I know that several factors have played into my obsession with shopping, clothing addiction, and I know that Instagram and social media is one part of it, the satisfaction is another part of it, but how does it all work together? After my all-conclusive research into the world of my own brain, I've come up with a couple of reasons as to why, especially in this area, it can be so difficult for us to be satisfied. And yes, there are many answers out there about how we're following too many trends, how we don't know what style looks best on our bodies and what works best for us. And while I could turn this video into a how to find your personal style, that's not really the kind of research slash background that I have. And I just think it's more fun to explore the mental and emotional process behind why we shop for clothes in the first place. And of course, one major reason is that clothing are a functional tool. They are practical. They're not just pieces of things that we put on for decoration, which leads into the first problem, which is that we buy clothes for aesthetic value. Now, there's nothing wrong with buying clothes for aesthetic value, but first we have to go back to the proper function of clothes, and this is a term used by Aristotle. Why am I mentioning Aristotle? Why is this a philosophy crash course? If you want a philosophy crash course on Aristotle, you can watch this video literally titled Crash Course Aristotle. But just to sum it up for the purposes of this video, Aristotle talks about virtues, and he talks about the proper function of any object. For Aristotle, any object that fulfills its proper function is virtuous, or the virtue of an object is its proper function. For example, a kitchen knife. The proper function of a kitchen knife is to cut food.
I don't know, I'm kind of scared.
There you go.
I definitely am not a good cutter, so don't zoom in on me.
It is not to stab or murder people. So if it was being used to stab or murder people, it would not be a very virtuous kitchen knife. If this was a, I don't know what other kinds of knives there are out there, hunting knives, weaponry knives, things that are meant to be used as actual weapons, then their proper function would be to harm other living creatures. Under Aristotle's theory, it would be virtuous, fulfilling its proper function by stabbing, killing, etc. I don't know why I use such a violent example, but the knife is a frequently used example for this concept. So what is the proper function of clothing? Well, the first thing we have to remember is that clothing was made for us. We were not made for clothing. Clothing is made for humans to be warm, to cover themselves in public society, to protect vulnerable parts of our body from exposure to wind, dust, all the other things in nature that can be so harmful for us fragile little creatures. But of course, as time evolved and grew and society evolved, so did clothing, which is why it's tricky to say exactly what the purpose of clothing is now. It is not necessarily wrong to say one purpose of clothing is to express ourselves in a creative fashion. We live in a generation where clothing no longer is just a practical tool, but can also play the role of a social status symbol. It can be cultural, it can be traditional, it can be self-expressive. None of those things are wrong. As long as the clothing is created with that intent, it would be fulfilling its proper function, according to Aristotle. And now, of course, we should all know from being bombarded by influencers, YouTube, sustainable, everything online, that the problem with the clothing industry is overconsumption and over-manufacturism. industrialization. There should be a word for that. Overproduction. There you go. Production. But of course, there's also the question of the chicken and the egg. Is it the demand that comes first, or is it the production and the marketing? I'm not going to get into all of that, but it is possible that when we are oversaturated with things that were once used as practical tools, but now is used for other purposes, we have forgotten the actual purpose of clothing. I'm definitely not here to say that we should all just strip down to the most bare minimum of what clothing we need and buy nothing else. That's not what I'm saying. You all know that I love clothes. It's weird to say I love clothes. I don't love clothes. I enjoy putting clothes together in ways that make me look and feel nice. And I also enjoy doing it on other people. And I enjoy when people feel confident in their clothes. I also just think of fashion as an art in itself. And the reason it's so hard for me to see fashion go down this way with the industry is because it's happening to so many different forms of art. Cinema, literature, music. And because I do categorize fashion as an art form, I really dislike that it's being so commercialized. And it is one of the most heavily commercialized art forms. It just feels like the only way you can get non-commercial art is like an art gallery. Marketing's not very heavy for that. But when we remember these purposes of clothes, such as practical function, but also as a piece of art, it's not necessarily just a mental solution. Like thinking that, I don't think will immediately solve the problem, but it is interesting to remember what clothes were actually made for in the first place and how it's changed so much through history. Of course, we could put some of the blame on industrialization, but you could do that with so many other things, like how clothing just used to be a tailor-made for you experience, and there used to be just so much less convenience and access to clothes in the first place. You'd have to go to the tailor, you'd have to get your clothing fitted and made, and it'd be expensive. And yes, being expensive was probably a huge factor, which again is why many people will talk about fast fashion in this sense of why do we have so many clothes and yet feel like we can't enjoy any of them. But I don't see fast fashion as just like an all evil. I see it also as a response. It really is a back and forth. It's like this sort of dance between people wanting to follow these trends, people wanting to try new things, but of course not actually being able to afford that. And maybe one problem is that we're trying to live outside of our means. Maybe that's just it. Maybe we aren't supposed to spend this much money on clothing, but we've just gotten so used to this idea, which sort of leads to the next problem, which is both kind of tied to the philosophical reason, but also a psychological reason, and that is, of course, the contribution of social media. And I'm talking especially formats of images like Instagram, YouTube, now TikTok too, I guess. And now obviously, disclaimer, like I know that I am a perpetrator in this. I have responsibility in posting photos, but again, I'm not really here to blame or judge any party. I want to focus more solely on the whys and the mentality behind our decisions to buy clothes. And the biggest contributing psychological factor I feel is that we buy clothing that looks good on other people. We see clothes on people who don't look anything like us sometimes, who aren't our height, our weight, our body shape and size, who aren't our ethnicity, who are not representative at all of what that clothing will look like on ourselves. And yet we see the clothes on the person, we say it looks good, and a large amount of the time it's actually the person that looks good. That's why they hire beautiful and tall models, guys. There's a reason certain humans are used in this industry. They're meant to make the clothing look good. And of course, if you've seen this video, you know that even those clothes don't actually fit properly on models because they're slimmer than the average size, and so they have to adjust the clothes to make them fit. When we see an item of clothing on a person, we're actually much more likely to buy it. I do think this is statistically proven that when we see a person's face on, let's say, a social media feed or on a marketing campaign, we're more likely to be interested, to click, and that's just part of a natural empathetic connection to humans, especially ones who look like us. A lot of the times when we see clothes that we like, we actually see it on an individual person, and we're seeing the whole image of this person, how the clothes accentuate and accessorize that person's body, their figure, their face, everything, how it complements their skin tone. And while it is helpful to see the clothing on actual people to see how it might fit, that is not a guarantee of how it will fit on you. The contribution of social media, as well as the prevalence and very easy access convenience to online shopping, is a huge factor, I believe, in why we have so many clothes that we don't wear. We see clothes online that we've never tried on, but it looks good on someone else, and so we buy it. It comes, it doesn't fit right, the color is weird, it doesn't look like it did in the photos. We end up either returning or just shoving it in the back of our closet. This has happened to me countless times, so I understand this experience far too well. But it's not just the way that the clothes are presented on social media, it's how frequent your exposure is to it. And by now we all know the secrets of social media algorithms. When we're exposed to this many types of clothing on this many kinds of people, and there's so much easy access to photos and to videos of people wearing these clothing, we can face decision paralysis. This is something that I personally have alongside anxiety. Decision paralysis is basically when we have too many choices on our hands and it actually makes the decision more difficult. Now, we all enjoy freedom. We like having our free choices. We like being able to choose one thing over the other. But this video about love said that a human brain can only handle up to 9 choices at a time. And if this number can apply to human relationships, as in I can only concentrate on up to 9 Tinder dates at a time, then I'm pretty sure the same can apply in other areas of my life. And I've seen it apply in other areas of my life where too many choices are laid out in front of me and I can't make a decision. I'm horrible at making decisions anyways. It gives me a lot of anxiety and I always ask people for advice, even the smallest ones, because I feel like choosing one means giving up on the other, which it is at the time. There are very few things we can have all at once without being overindulgent. But when you connect the psychological to the philosophical reasons, when we are oversaturated on social media and our brains are overloaded with all these different choices, as well as this desire to look a certain way or to look nice in the clothes that look nice on other people. When we combine those two together, it makes perfect sense why so many of us make bad or poor shopping choices. Now, as I make this video, am I perfect in all this? Am I suddenly making these all smart and wise choices about my fashion and about shopping? No, of course not. This is my evidence. But if you have the self-control and the will and the desire to pursue after a more clutter-free and less chaotic closet life, then I do think there are some habits that we can adopt. I'm gonna try to challenge myself to do it. I don't know when I'll start. Might start after this video, might start next month, it'll start eventually. As the saying goes, do as I say, not as I do. But I do realize these are some severe problems that I have in my life that I need to work on. One solution I can definitely think of, do a social media fast. And I know that personally for me, the temptation to create posts is a huge factor in why I buy so many clothes. I really want to make a video about brands that only influencers wear. I've just seen so many of them and I'm like, this looks really nice, but also I would never wear this outside of a photo, which I think is a good example of how we're starting to lose the purpose of clothing. At the same time, I really love avant-garde fashion. I do think there's a place for that. Somehow social media, has become like a photo collage, has become like a museum of, wow, I really like that analogy. Instagram is a museum for fashion, but it's like the museum is so oversaturated with the same things that you kind of get sick of it. But maybe if I were to treat my Instagram like a museum, like my own personal curation that doesn't rely on other people's influence, which is very hard. You do need inspiration, but in the name of inspiration, we tend to just go along with the same trends and oversaturate anyways. So for you, maybe it's about getting off social media completely, or if fashion is really something that you enjoy and you want to find your own unique style, maybe it's like treating it a little more special, treating it a little more like your own unique gallery rather than. So when you see a photo on Instagram, don't just automatically click on the link and find the exact same piece, but think about how will this incorporate into my wardrobe? How will this look on me personally? That's one thing I really need to work on. Oh my gosh, I did a complete tangent and I completely forgot to say this. When I mentioned the whole buying clothing for aesthetic value, it means I literally just see a piece of clothing, I think it's beautiful on its own, like a work of art, and then I buy that. But the problem with clothing, it's not just a piece of art, it's a piece of art on you. You are the piece of art. You are beautiful, you are creative, you are meant to shine with this piece of art on you, but it's not complete without you.
I would like to sincerely apologize of my heart.
For me, my solution would be to find a harmony between the clothing and myself, to find a middle ground where I can say, oh, yes, this looks beautiful, but it looks beautiful on me. That's the purpose of clothing, proper function. The next thing is to stop buying clothes online. I'm going to be patient. I'm going to actually go out of my way and buy clothes in person. So that does limit your options to what's local, what's around you, what you can actually access. If that's a challenge for you, I would say make it fun. Make it like a date with your friend, like a fun group activity. Go shopping with your friends. This is like a thing that, you know, we used to do all the time, and now we all just buy our clothes online, or at least I do. And I do think that isolation can be also really big. We don't want to be isolated in our little worlds with no advice, no help from anyone else. We want to get feedback from people. We want people to say, hey, that looks good on you. That doesn't really fit you that well. Or that color is like, oh. We want honesty from our friends. And technically other people are the ones seeing it on you, so their perspective might be more accurate than yours in a mirror. Don't shop online, try to shop in person, do it with friends. Take a break from social media if you can. If fashion is really something you're interested in and you want to make it more about your own personal style, think of yourself as a piece of art. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much.